He's just now grasping what the difference between exoplanets and planets in this solar system are. So I just want to express my objection to the 8-planet characteristic. I think you need to take into account, especially with all the mandates about testing that the federal and state governments impose. If you go with only 8, the result is that's what the kids are going to learn and know and nothing else.
Thank you very much.
While the other people at the table are thinking of how to respond, I just wanted to say I agree with the questioner. And you'll be really happy to know a bunch of kindergartners I know at different schools and in different states. They actually have come. Actually, they're kindergarten or younger. They actually have come home having learned about the 8 planets, but also about the dwarf planets as well. And the teachers are actually teaching them about both right now. So you're right that if we keep these, one's a planet, one's a dwarf planet, they'll still learn about those.
I think the key thing, if we can keep with 8 planets, is that there are other important objects. There are many, many other important objects in the solar system. And if you teach that there are these 8, which are the largest, the most significant bodies, but the other bodies are very important, and some of them, Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, Juno, Pluto, were once considered planets. But they were found to be more objects like that, not fewer.
Here I have to disagree. So I'll just interject that I think that what Jack is saying is an implicitly narrow point of view, which is one that's shared by a lot of astronomers and dynamicists in particular. It's sort of a dynamics-centric view. When he says the most important objects, he means in terms of shaping the architecture of what orbits where in a solar system. That's one way to look at things. Another way to look at things are what are the places that have life in a solar system. Or from a geological perspective or geophysical perspective, Bill McKinnon and people who have similar interests would look at the most active bodies in a solar system as perhaps the most important. If you were an atmospheric scientist, you'd look at those that had atmospheres as important to you. So I really favor a broad definition and then many subcategories that do the job in a very fluid way so that we can adapt to whatever the conversation is about. If we want to talk about planets with atmospheres, that's a class of planets. We want to sort them by size. It's another equally relevant way to do it, but it's not the only way. And I just want to point out this subtle implicit bit that we're hearing about what's important is only important if it's size based upon how it controls dynamics.
Well,
David Morrison.
I really want to hear more from the non-scientists. I thought your question was excellent. Can we keep it going? We've had a lot of great discussions of planetary science here, but I am still left baffled. Why does it matter if Pluto's called a planet or not? Why does it matter to educators? Why does it matter to the public? It obviously does.
Again, Dave, I think it's just whether something is considered important. And, leaving aside, just leaving the issue of satellites and moons completely off the table, if you have a classification scheme that has planets and then just basically debris, asteroids and comets, then it's too coarse a division. That's kind of why I actually like...
I talk the same language. I'd love to hear it from the
All right. Go ahead.
Shivani Elias, Junior, Illinois. I am not a scientist. I'm just an interested person. And when the IAU changed the definition of a planet, and I read about it in the newspaper, it just didn't make sense to me as a non-scientist. And it seems to me that the definition was one that was rushed into. And I'm curious as to why the IAU had to rush and come up with a definition that didn't make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense. If Pluto is not a planet, that's fine with me. But then I think from the basic definition they've come up with, we only have 4 planets. But the IAU does not recognize that. The only planet excluded is Pluto. And I'm curious as to why Earth and the other planets were also not excluded.
Does somebody want to comment on why we have to rush into it?
I'll comment to the rush into it. Well, people were finding objects out there, and people knew it was an issue, but then Eris was found. And Eris is bigger and more massive than Pluto. And it would be really hard to tell kindergartners who didn't have this preconception that Eris is not a planet and Pluto is. So some change had to be made.
Shouldn't it make sense?
Well, Jack, Mike Brown was happy to have Errol be a planet.
I am not defending the IAU definition, which I gave a C and a D to. But I'm just trying to explain why the issue had to come to a head so quickly.
I think we heard this morning from someone, I forget whom, who really, I think, told us why the definition was created, was rushed into, and that was because historically the IAU is in charge of naming things, and they had categories for naming things, and they didn't know which category to put Eris in, so they could give it the name Eris. Other than that, there was no meaningful scientific reason to rush into anything. As you've heard today, there is no consensus from the scientific community about what to do about the word planet. Maybe we shouldn't be doing anything about the word planet. But I think it's pretty clear why we were rushed into it.
I'd like to address why it makes sense, just in a way that was captured on a graph, but in a less technical way. And, when the first asteroids were found in the early 1800s, people initially thought they found other planets. Then they started to find hundreds of objects in the asteroid belt, and now we know of thousands. And they decided that you couldn't just have a planet surrounded by like a kind of continuum of objects. You couldn't have Ceres when you had thousands and thousands of objects in the same orbit. The Pluto case is only different because Pluto was found many decades, like almost 7 decades, before hundreds and thousands of objects were found surrounding Pluto in the same orbits. So it really makes sense. If Pluto had been found 2 years before the Kuiper Belt had been found, there wouldn't be any issue.
Well, the asteroids, 4 were found, then there were 4 decades before any others were found. During those 4 decades, the 4 were known as planets.
Hal wants to.
I just want to say one thing quickly, because tomorrow morning Owen Gingerich is going to have a nice talk about the historical background,
I should know that.
classification
I thought
scheme.
one was found and when the rest were found.
We'll go over all this again. We'll come right over there in a minute.
Okay, so Jack is telling us something that a lot of us didn't know. So we've already had this problem before. And was there a problem when they changed those 4 asteroids?
I think Hal was saying Owen will address this tomorrow.
A full talk tomorrow.
On the asteroid history.
And as opposed to on the asteroid history.
I want to hear back from the person who asked the question,
Yeah.
if it makes sense now or not. Can you?
Yeah, well, you'll be here tomorrow?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Next, let me turn it on to the next comment or question.
There seem to be 2 problems. One is a scientific definition, the other one is nomenclature. Scientific being, do you use dynamics, do you use just mass, that type of thing. And I'm not going to address that here. It's been gone over quite well. One of the problems with the nomenclature that I see, and I saw at the time of the vote of the IAU, was the fact that dwarf planets were not considered planets. I actually stood up in front of the IAU and asked this question because there was a vote taken on a resolution that did not pass, that if it did pass, then dwarf planets would have been considered planets. Pluto would be a dwarf planet but still kept its planetary status. And it was a very small resolution, and it said insert the word classical before the word planet in that first resolution and in the footnotes. Unfortunately, in my mind, unfortunately it did not pass, so it's created quite a bit of confusion, especially since it's very inconsistent with quite a bit of astronomy. For example, we have dwarf galaxies, they're galaxies, but we have dwarf planets that aren't considered planets. If anybody wants to comment on that.
The official name of asteroids was minor planets, and they weren't considered planets. So there's a history behind it. Neutron stars aren't stars. So I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying there's precedent for these type of errors.
You want to make a comment? You wanted to make a comment before? No?
Yeah, I think it's far enough past.
Over here.
Yeah, Kelly.
It occurs to me that 1 year from today will be the final day and the general session of the next IAU meeting. And I was wondering if the panelists would care to venture whether or not this issue will be on the agenda, and whether, now recognizing that the definition has shortcomings, if not outright flaws, that it will be revisited and perhaps revoked.
I have no insight into what the IAU will or won't do, but I think the community has no choice but to eventually revisit the definition, either to throw it out and say a definition is created by building consensus among the working community,